Some people are making a parkour kind of game, so I'm just going to take you through some of the basics you'll need to make that work. So I've set myself up parkour style with a couple of platforms to run and jump, and I've also put a portal on here which will take us to a new scene, because I'm imagining we start in one place. You've got basically a jumping puzzle. You've got to stay on the platforms until you get to the end, which will then take you to another level. And I've got a terrain at the bottom here. So the main thing that we need to be able to do is detect collisions. We need to detect when we've collided with the ground, and we need to detect when we've collided with the portal. And then, when we've done that, we can change scenes and move ourselves around. So it's surprisingly difficult to do collisions in Unity, and every time I do it I find I have to do quite a bit of trial and error and quite a little bit of looking stuff up either on the internet or on projects that I've previously made. So I did sit down a few minutes ago and made one, so I'll be slightly more efficient than when I was making that one. So first things first is we need to tag some things, because when we detect a collision we need to know what it is, and the correct and best way to do that, not the only way but the best way, is to have tagged objects. So you can see here the terrain at the moment is untagged. I'm going to add a tag called ground. So the terrain will be tagged as ground. Strangely though, when you add a new tag, I'm not quite sure how you would just then directly add it, but anyway, so terrain tagged as ground, and the portal, I'm going to add another tag for that, which is going to be portal, and go back to portal and change tag to untag to portal. Good. So I'll just check that we haven't broken anything. It's always important as we move through to make sure nothing's broken. So yeah, here we are, and I can run around and I can hit that. Nothing has changed yet. So in order to actually do something about the collisions, we need to have some scripting happen. Collisions are detected anyway, but there's no code attached to them. That's what we need to do. So I'm going to attach the collision stuff to FPS controller, and over in the inspector for the FPS controller, if I scroll down, I can add a component. And what I'm going to add, if I go to scripts, scroll right to the bottom, new script, and new script is going to be called my collision system, maybe, I don't know, something like that. It's always hard to name things. Create and add, and if we give it a moment while it thinks about it, there we are, my collision system. And although it's grayed out, you can double click it and it will now open it in Visual Studio. And you may well have to sign in. I think you can sign in with your school account or whatever. Anyway, so we will see some script. So this, we need to kind of understand what's going on in this window before we actually do anything here. Let's just quickly talk about some things. So right at the top up here, this is about some of the import stuff that happens, some of the code that's being used in here. We don't need to do anything with this. We may have to do something later. Don't want that. But this is kind of the main thing. The My Collision System is a class. And what we need to understand is the curly bracket thing. So what has happened, how this works, is we define the class, and then we have a pair of curly brackets, an opening one and a closing one, and everything in between those is the code for My Collision System. So when we write our code, it has to be between these brackets, otherwise it doesn't get counted as being in here and doesn't work. And then all of these come by default with a start and an update. We're not going to use these, but they're quite useful to look at how they work. It does what it says on the tin. Start is called before the first frame update. Update is called once per frame. You can imagine how useful that is. You use these a lot. But they've got the same idea. We've got the function is defined, start, and then we've got opening bracket, closing bracket, and when you write code, you write it here in between those. Same with update. So when we write any of our own functions, we need to be really conscious of where we are in this environment. So we're going to have one. It's going to be called void, and I'm going to call it on collision enter. Now I have actually made a deliberate mistake, which I'll come back to in a moment. So void on collision enter is is baked into Unity. It is a specific piece of code. So we can actually write our own functions with our own names, but we have to call those separately. There's a whole bunch of them which you don't have to call. They're just kind of like start and update as special names. On collision enter as a special name. So the code is going to go in the curly brackets, and you always do the same as I'm going to do here. If I open a curly bracket, it automatically gives me a closing bracket, which is nice. And then I hit enter, and it automatically indents the code and puts the brackets in the same kind of format. For readability purposes, we should always try to follow the same format with the same indentation that Unity presents to us. So on collision enter, we're going to write some code in here. Now I do know that on collision enter also needs a collision object, not a collision system. Hit escape so it doesn't auto-complete that. Collision. So this collision thing is all the information about the current collision that just happened. So when we collide with something, that will fire up. Now I'm actually going to just check that this works, and it won't work for reasons that will become clear in a minute. So I'm going to do a debug.log of collision, so that we see that appear in the console. I'll show you what that looks like. You'll notice the red squiggly line has appeared at the end of that line. In C#, we always need to have a semicolon at the end of a line. If it's just a statement, or if it's an if or a loop or something like that, you might have curly brackets, but typically you've got a semicolon at the end of the line. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back into here, and I'll click on the console window. I've got two audio listeners in the scene. FPS controller comes with a camera. I already had a camera. Let's get rid of the camera. Right, so that gets rid of those, clear all those errors, warnings, hit play. And here I have landed on that thing. And now if I run over here, it didn't say collision, it didn't say collision. So when I collide with stuff, it should say collision, it doesn't. So it's a special, I've kind of put this in because I made this mistake. I tried recording this video a few minutes ago, and I got completely lost and couldn't work out why it wasn't working. And the reason was super important that you get the capitalization right. It's actually capital O on collision enter. You're in a world of accuracy when it comes to coding. Everything has to be spelt right, your semicolons have to be in the right place, your brackets have to be in the right place. Everything, you've got to really up your game in terms of how accurate and careful you are. And even when you're super accurate and careful, you can guarantee minor details will trip you up regularly. It's the world of a developer. You get better at it all the time. The worst stage to be at is right at the very beginning when you don't even know what those mistakes are. But you get over that hump eventually. Let's just try that again. So save that back into Unity, hit play. And let's see what happens. Hit play again because it didn't seem to work that time. So I'll fall over here and I'll walk over here and it still doesn't work. And I'm going to pause and work out why. So I think I've remembered what it was. The problem was here. I'm using the FPS controller, and I think it's not the FPS controller that works here. I think it's the rigid body FPS controller. Now we need to add that script back in, but it actually is just in the list of scripts now. So my collision system, there it is, added that in. And if I hit play, I'm hopeful that this will work. And I didn't test that properly because I didn't check the console. We did get a collision. I think we collided with the ground, but I didn't put it in the right position, did I? So are we still running here? We are, yeah. So it's a rigid body FPS controller. Let's put the Y coordinate to 3 meters so it falls onto the platform. And we've got the console open. So when we start, we land, and then we walk over here, and when we collide with the portal, we have something works. Seems to have locked up there. Don't know why. You know what? Not going to worry about it for the minute. It is. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure you could adapt the FPS controller just by adding a rigid body to it. But I'm not going to bother with that right now. The sound doesn't work with a rigid body FPS controller. I assume it's just a little bit broken. We could fix that another time. Anyway, we move on. So you can see the value though. of having this here. Obviously we're going to write some code in a minute, but by doing this debug.log, we checked that we were actually getting into this place in the code. You know, I could have written heaps of code in here and try to work out why it wasn't working properly and whatever, but if we weren't even getting here, then I was completely wasting my time. I'm going to leave that there for now, and I'm going to start looking at the things that we can do. So I'm going to say if, and you have to do it in this format with these brackets, and I have done this before, so I know that I can ask about the collision dot other is referring to the thing we collided with. So instead of being the collision, there's two parts to a collision. There's you and there's the other thing you collided with. That's the other. And dot tag equals is how we do comparisons in coding. Singles equals is assigning a value. Double equals is comparing values. And equals ground. We've landed on the ground. So then I'm going to check this as well. So I'm going to put in a debug.log. You know what? I'm going to copy this and I'm going to change it slightly. In fact, I'm going to cut that. I don't really need that anymore. I'm going to say ground or whatever. So save that back into here and hit play. And when we do the landing on stuff now, here we go. If I walk forwards and land on the ground, it says ground. Let's just do that again. And this time I'll walk into the portal and it should say nothing because we checked. Keep hanging out when I get to that portal. I wonder why. Cross that bridge in a minute. So if collision.other.tag equals ground, then I'm going to reset the position is the easiest thing to do. I'm going to reset me to my starting position. So I'm going to say transform dot position. So transform is how you refer to everything to do with your location in space for your object. So there's the position, there's also the rotation and maybe scale, I can't remember. So by saying transform, spelling that correctly, transform dot position equals, and then it's got to be a 3D coordinate x, y, z. And the way you say a 3D coordinate in Unity is you say new vector 3. So vector 3 is kind of an object. And the three numbers, you'd think the original position was 0, 3, 0. They're floating point numbers, means they're decimal numbers. So just to be belt and braces so it knows what's going on. 0.0f, 3.0f, 0.0f. I'm not actually sure, it might just work anyway. But I'm just doing that because I know that it does work definitely. Semicolon on the end, so the squiggle goes away. So in theory, save that, go back to here, hit play. And we're good. Yep, so if I fall off, it puts me back to the beginning. So that's working. All right. So next thing, I now want it that this goes to a new scene when I touch it. So what I'm going to do to achieve that, firstly I need a new scene. So we've got a whole scene menu over here. I think the easiest thing to do is to say file new scene that says do you want to make a save to this? Sample scene.unity. Yeah, sample scene's a bad name, but anyway. And now I'm going to save this scene and in save scene in assets as, I'm going to call it scene 2 because I can remember that name. Save. And then if I go, so this is, I'm not going to do anything in here. I'm just going to go back to open scene, and it was in the scenes sample scene. Great name. So I want it to be another if statement now. We've already done this if statement, if collision.other.tag equals ground, and that was all this lot. So you see, I didn't even mention the curly brackets this time, but yeah, it's a thing. If this thing is true, then do everything between the curly brackets, and that's what I did there. So after that curly bracket, I'm going to do another if statement, and it'll be pretty much the same. If collision.other.tag equals portal was the tag I'd created, and open curly brackets, hit enter.